In just 30 days, a supermassive asteroid will collide with planet Earth with a high chance of wiping out all traces of life. And with hundreds of players knowing that the world is about to explode, do you think they will join forces to try to survive? Or will they fight among themselves and commit the worst atrocities, knowing there will be no consequences? This is basically a social experiment carried out by the YouTuber Sapeover on a survival multiplayer server with lots and lots of players. The credits are in the description. On the first day after receiving the drastic news, we began our journey on an island isolated from humanity, located on the eastern coast of Russia. The main goal is to form alliances with other players and, if necessary, build a super powerful war arsenal like a fortress, a nuclear bomber plane, and everything needed to keep the economy running and humanity busy. Before anything else, we need to gather some materials, specifically diamonds, to craft our first armor. This needs to be done as quickly as possible because soon we'll be surrounded by the worst and most bloodthirsty guys. While our location hadn't been discovered yet and we were temporarily at peace, things on the other side of the world were getting a little out of control. Knowing that the world was about to end, many people started committing unspeakable atrocities, whether it was stealing, fighting, shoplifting, or even burning things. Some of them even made a competition among themselves, which was about taking out as many opponents as possible before the day of the great disaster. Let's continue our journey. The group spent the rest of day 1 avoiding the chaos while mining and gathering resources. On the second day, we had already gotten enough diamonds to build our first full set of armor. Now we were ready to go head to head with anyone. Out of the corner of our eye, we spotted the enemy and were soon found by a pair of spies. One of them calmly approached and tried to create a bond of friendship, complementing the plantation we had made the day before. At that moment, only two things were going through my mind. Either I try to escape from here as quickly as possible, or I stop being the bait and become the predator, possibly eliminating two innocent people. The second option is more intriguing, albeit slightly unethical. So, moving forward with the axe and hitting them, the players begged for mercy, and so the protagonist ended up choosing to listen to what they had to propose. After a lot of talking, there was a small bond, and the best way to start the saga would be by forming a small alliance. Their names are Spay and Mindless, and although they don't have the best armor, they seem to be men of bravery and loyalty. So we went to visit their base, which was only 200 blocks away from our cave. We found another member named MC Yun, who upon hearing about an asteroid heading for Earth, went crazy and became totally sad, drunk and lost. While we were forming this small group, the other players around the world were declaring war on each other. Small factories and bases were starting to take shape and barbaric things were happening in them, while dozens of innocent people ended up being eliminated from the social test. Several of these anarchic events were happening in random places around the globe, like in the African continent, the United States, and Australia. Our group was growing with some great minds like Fast Jazz and A1306. That way, I gathered the group on the 5th day so we could come up with a complete survival plan. After hours, we decided to name the alliance the Smashers. Our initial goal was to get farms as quickly as possible and secure the safest bunker in order to wait out the apocalypse. And during one of our meetings, an arrow shot from several meters away flew through hundreds of blocks and fatally struck MC Yun in the head, eliminating him almost instantly. The people responsible for that arrow were a group of newcomers called the Legion, led by Murphin. This group crossed the entire continent, destroying absolutely everything in their path until they finally reached us. That was how the first battle between groups began. They came through the forest we mentioned earlier and went straight into hand-to-hand combat, and our members were not at all prepared for this particular battle. So two of our warriors ended up being eliminated, which only made things worse for our team. Then, with our strength recovered, we counterattacked the Legion and eliminated some of their members, making them retreat back to the hole they had come from. So they may have won the battle, but the war was just beginning. The first step now was to try to get the best armor and tools possible. They started by building a secret underground base where a super trading factory with villagers operated, designed and built by the brilliant Fast Jazz. Every hour, the villagers' reproduction kept increasing and we had more options, expanding our range of possibilities. One of our members used his knowledge of redstone to build a Trinitrotoluene machine in order to make space for a slime farm. Afterwards, we cleaned up all the remaining traces, built layers of stone, automated the farm, and finally we could watch everything work perfectly well. In addition, we created several other farms such as the Iron Golem farm to get iron, the Ocean farm to obtain tridents, and finally a castle that was still being finished. With the resources available, our hero decided to cross the continent to gather information about the Legion, that arch-rival team that had attacked us. On the way, he spotted a player named Pandas who apparently was lost and no relevant information was obtained from him. However, the mission continued in search of clues about the whereabouts of our executioner. The interrogation continued for some time with several different people until we decided to give up on this region. Then, after reaching the southern hemisphere, we found a group of rather alternative players. They seemed pretty strange and suspicious since they didn't have any armor or tools at this point in the game. However, one of them claimed he had a proposal that could benefit us. According to this player, he was the main messenger of the being responsible for sending the meteor to Earth, and if we partnered with him, we could escape the disaster that was about to happen. Obviously, we didn't let ourselves get carried away by this crazy act and continued on our path to gather information about our enemies. However, once again, nothing was achieved. We can draw two conclusions from this. Either people are afraid to talk about the whereabouts of our executioners, or we're chasing after the most secretive group in the whole world. So, we returned to our main base, which was located in the far east of Russia. However, when we got there, we spotted an unknown and very suspicious player near our slime farm. So, we decided to go up to him to ask what his intentions were in approaching our group and how he had found us. He revealed to us that he came our way because he had important information to give us about the whereabouts of Murphy, the leader of the Legion. In addition, he gave us a top-secret book that, according to him, contains some clues to find our enemy's base. Without hesitation, we offered a small payment for the information. Out of curiosity, his payment was a pack of emerald blocks and he gave us an information book. Flipping through the pages, we discovered that this group was situated on Hawaii's southern coast in the United States. So, it was time to come up with a plan. Sitting around a campfire, we decided it was better to attack them by surprise than to wait for an attack. But before that, it would be necessary to leave the base protected. So, the plan would be as follows. Open up and clear a gigantic area of the map so we could use it as the main structure for the future bunker. For that, we would need thousands of TNTs to create a huge hole deep in the ground. And without much delay, the Trinitrotoluene bombing machines already started leveling the terrain and successfully managed to clear a large part of the underground area. Soon after, they were upgraded with slime blocks and redstone, so they could become real bombing planes. These planes were set up to drop twice as many bombs. In addition, machines were built that could dry up any and all traces of water in order to prevent the systems from being interrupted. So after millions of blocks were broken and days of the bombing machines running, the perimeter was finally ready.
After about a day of running, the perimeter had been completed.
While our group was focused on finishing the construction of the bunker and strengthening our bonds of friendship, other players around the world were carrying out their own survival plans. A guild of survivors from Ethiopia organized their own underground castle, while the residents of the southern United States focused on building factories and powerful weapons arsenals. In China, a crazy guy who was alone on his journey built a giant structure made only of beds, supposedly to survive the meteor impact. Okay, that's really very bizarre. Here in Brazil, a fortress embedded in the mountain was the work that drew the most attention. And there was also Murphin, our great enemy, who was calm in his base located in Hawaii. A curious fact is that in this video, I told you that a crazy guy showed up saying he was a representative of a divine being and could protect the group from the threat of the asteroid. Well, he inexplicably started to gain dozens of followers, and with that, he was building a powerful base in the interior of the United Kingdom. But anyway, going back to our reality, in the far east of Russia, the clan had already made great progress in the mission and was covering and hiding the bunker using the natural vegetation. The Trinitrotoluene machines were recycled and turned into smooth stone generators, which was a big help for all the progress. This allowed the entire open wall to be covered with stone, then filled with dirt, trees and grass, giving the place a natural appearance. And honestly, the final result of this work seemed somewhat questionable. The patches made in the area are totally noticeable.
Little bit suspicious. I came across this. I think we should do...
What we need to do now is get some seedlings and try to plant as many trees as we can. After hours of cutting trunks, collecting wood and saplings, the dirty job turned into a perfect copy of a forested mountainous biome. And the result couldn't have turned out better. After several sleepless nights with hard architectural planning and color matching, our greatest work is finally reaching the desired result. However, we must finish what we started, so let's get to work. After a few more days of work, the bunker was complete. So, the next step was to come up with strategies to carry out some active attack instead of taking a passive stance. So heading to the United States, or rather to Hawaii, some of our members kept holding their positions and ensuring the security of our base. However, we couldn't fully trust them, not due to a lack of loyalty, but because of their limited player versus player skills. Anyway, upon arriving in California, the warriors built a small teleporter made of ender pearls in case things didn't go as expected. After that, they finally spotted Hawaii, which they could reach by swimming since it was very close. The place was recognizable due to the massive volcano at its center, making it easy to identify. Besides that, next to this natural feature, we found a base that matched very well with the information we were given about the Legion's base. It had an underwater tunnel in the sea that seemed to lead to a bunker located in the depths of the ocean. We decided to go there to verify the authenticity of the structure. These were tense moments. We got close to the base, pulled out our pickaxes, made a hole in the wall, and entered the place. There we came across a strange and empty structure which actually looked more like a trap. Until suddenly we saw particles coming out of the wall, and at that moment fear took over our bodies, but it was quickly replaced by adrenaline when we came face to face with the members of the Legion, who immediately came after our group. After a lot of fighting, losing hit points and sword swings, we changed our tactics and went into the water, since there we would have more of an advantage as we could use our newly acquired tridents. However, something that was about to drastically worsen our situation was about to happen. The meteor that was heading toward Earth broke off a shard from its shell, which fell a few kilometers from the ocean where we were fighting our great battle. In this way, the war had to stop for a few moments so we could observe the large crater that this natural disaster had caused and to see if it had left any fragments. However, something even worse would happen a few seconds later. The meteor impact eroded the island's volcano from within, causing it to erupt and explode, instantly releasing thousands of liters of lava. The lucky factor in this situation was that we were considerably far from the explosion, so it was possible to try to escape by swimming, but there was little time for that. It turns out that the lava started to take over the ocean and inevitably got close to our group and theirs. At that moment, we were fighting against the fear of burning to death and against the Legion, which was still our enemy, but for now, not our biggest one. Suddenly, Murphy and his henchmen managed to get some wooden boats and boarded them, leaving us behind. Despite the odds, we pursued them with resolve, attempting to board together to survive. Still, we had to abort the mission and leave them, as the lava was rapidly approaching. That way, the only safe place would be the mountains. And now that the lava had consumed Miami, we moved on to part 2, where an expedition was carried out to find the new base of our arch-rivals, which consisted of a fortress in southern Africa. There it was possible to see dozens of posters inviting ordinary people and mercenaries to join the group. So while our enemies had 15 members, we had only 9. To level the playing field, our heroes group also created dozens of eye-catching posters to get people interested in joining our team. As many players lost their bases to the volcano, we recruited 14 more people, bringing our total to 24 members. Gus Colt, led by player Pixel Place, was the only civilization that remained isolated and unallied with any other team. They're the ones there, led by the crazy leader claiming to be the universal being's messenger, saying he'll save everyone from the meteor. And we shouldn't discredit them because so far they've proven to be extremely competent players despite their craziness. Now that our group of members is relatively larger, we are going to build a base strategically located near the Legion. Anyway, our next objectives will be pretty simple. We are going to build a huge military arsenal made up of a Trinitor Tallwane bomber plane, warships with cannons, gunpowder factories, and the most complex electric cannon in the history of Minecraft. That way, we had to start our journey from the bottom, building small farms and gradually strengthening our equipment. After a while, it was finally time to think about our first warship. Mining thousands of smooth stones and concrete blocks took hours. The construction started with the base structure of the ship, then we focused on its hull, the interior, the gears, the redstone wiring, the system, the deck, and finally the cannon. This way, it was possible to standardize the creation of the ships and start producing them on a larger scale. Meanwhile, observing our enemies allowed us to analyze the entire area where Murphin's army was located. They had watchtowers, concrete houses, fortified walls, and even prisons made of obsidian. On the way home, we ran into Groys, one of the men from the Legion who was actually an old acquaintance of the YouTuber. This allowed for a brief conversation and as a result a cheap shot, taking out the player in a not so honorable but necessary way. After returning to base, it was possible to see all the great progress the group had already made. Now it's time to start building our weapons, or rather our super automatic cannons, which will use complex redstone systems and will be able to fire dozens of TNTs per second. They will also be capable of bombarding Africa's entire coast and destroying all enemies present. However, this feature didn't seem enough to us since we still needed something that could penetrate our enemy's base. That's why we decided to start building our bomber ship, which has a system similar to the ship's and is capable of doubling the amount of TNTs, carrying out a supermassive and destructive bombing attack in much less time. In addition, with sticky pistons, it can literally fly in any direction. With the acquisition of ships, cannons, and the plane, our army's military progress is becoming increasingly remarkable. However, a big problem suddenly arose. That's because our primary target was the main base of the Legion, but we didn't expect them to have a plan B. Our enemies also owned a bunker located underwater in the ocean, which made any possibility of bombing difficult since TNTs don't work underwater. So, we decided to hold an emergency meeting with the leadership, coming up with a new strategy to destroy the Legion's plan B. Cadiz, a group member, had the unique idea of making a super trinitrotoluene sniper. And well, to succeed in life, it's necessary to take some risks. So, embracing Cadiz's plan, we would do our best to execute it perfectly. The operation of the super sniper would be as follows. We would build an arsenal of flying machines right at the edge of the sky, and when activated it would release a kind of guided missile capable of stopping at the coordinates we indicated. Once there, it would drop hundreds of trinitrotoluene minecarts at the same time, followed by a jet of water to prevent premature explosions. That way, the missile would enter through the only access point, and if no one destroyed it within seconds, it would blow up a large part of our enemy's base. In addition, we had another super cannon positioned miles away, which would be activated the moment our missile hit their base, causing a double explosion and annihilating everyone around. It turns out that at the same time as our attack, our enemies from the Legion crossed the entire continent to attack the civilization of the Gays, the weird ones who had remained neutral until then. There, they set fire to the walls, houses, and statues, looted resources, and finally blackmailed the members to join them. Many refused, which enraged the leaders of the Legion, who ended up completely destroying the entire base of the Innocents. In addition, the residents were subdued and taken to prison, being forced to work and fight each other. But anyway, at this point there was nothing else we could do, so we returned to our base and began preparations for the final battle. After a long and tense strategy meeting, we decided to activate our super trinitrotoluene sniper. Then we followed the missile to see if it would safely reach its final destination. When it finally reached the correct coordinates, it launched the trinitrotoluene minecarts inside the Legion's secret bunker, and while we waited for activation, we turned on our main cannon, which bombarded the island's coast and the central base, activating the guided missile and destroying the entire interior of the underwater bunker. Then the big moment came to activate the trinitrotoluene bomber plane. The tension was high because from that moment on we would watch an entire continent being destroyed. To help, our machine controller activated the remaining cannons to provide ground support, and the sum of all these factors could only have one result. The Legion's base was completely annihilated. Our arch-rivals resorted to hand-to-hand combat as their last hope. In the open field, we saw an enemy atop a small mountain. Using our trident's power, we reached him, pushed him off, took him to the sea, and eliminated him. While the frantic hand-to-hand battles were happening, more victims were being made. It was at that moment that we realized our friend Spey, one of the group's great builders, had been captured by the enemies. Now, one of our only remaining friends in this world was mindless, so we found him in the middle of the battles, told him what happened, and realized we had unfinished business to settle with Murphin, the leader of the Legion. So the YouTuber and his friend went to meet the enemy Murphin, who was holding Spey hostage. As the conversation heated up, something that most people had forgotten finally came to light. The asteroid approaching Earth released another fragment, which hit the ocean in the southern part of the continent and caused a huge and massive tsunami. From that moment, we knew we had to leave as quickly as possible. However, tensions rose again because Murphy stopped the negotiations and resumed the attacks. Furthermore, every time we tried to get close to Spey to break the obsidian, we were thrown back because of the damage caused by Murphy's sword. Then the tsunami reached the place where we were, and it was already too late to try to save our friend who was trapped in the obsidian, and so unfortunately we lost him in the worst way possible. And the hard truth is that in war, there's no time for mourning, since all the warriors had to escape the tsunami, and at the same time Murphy and his henchmen who were still alive and chasing us. That way we entered a dense forest to try to cross the continent on foot. Meanwhile, all the bases, buildings, and bunkers were being swallowed by the tsunami's water. At this point, we had already managed to shake off the Legion group, but that wasn't what worried us the most at the moment. The lava from the volcano, the first natural disaster shown, had crossed the Americas, and the tsunami was reaching the edge of Europe. So we arrived at the old base of the civilization of the Mad, which was the only human-made structure still standing. We took our positions, gathered some resources, met up, and just waited for the worst to happen.